Hi, my name is Jared, and this is Horror Obsession. Today, I want to talk about Barbarian 2022, written and directed by Zach Krieger and starring Georgina Campbell and Bill Skarsgård. I had pretty high hopes for Barbarian, and let's be honest, anytime a big budget horror movie comes out, I have high hopes. Barbarian is getting pretty good reviews from both audiences and critics, and I've been watching a lot of Blumhouse and other extremely trashy horror movies lately. Barbarian is undoubtedly a step above that, but I wouldn't say it is an excellent horror movie. Georgina plays Tess, with the movie starting off with her pulling up to an Airbnb on a dark and stormy night. There's been a mix up with the key, and the host won't answer, but she quickly figures out why. There is a man inside the house already, Keith, and as it turns out, Keith has booked the place on a different site. After verifying that they each did, in fact, book the same place, Tess tries to find a hotel or another Airbnb, but there is a convention in town. Left with little choice, Tess decides to stay the night in the Airbnb despite the unconventional circumstances, and that's a setup for Barbarian. What frustrated me about it is there is a really great movie hiding in here, and I actually think maybe two different ways would have worked, but the way they ended up going was pretty disappointing. So what does any of this mean? It is hard to talk about without getting into spoilers, so let me wrap up the spoiler-free section by saying Barbarian is alright. If you are looking for a spooky movie to watch in theaters to kick off the fall, this will do just fine. I didn't find it that scary, and neither did my fiance, but I would imagine the average person would find this scary enough. If you are expecting a modern masterpiece, temper those expectations a bit, and you'll be fine. The acting is good, with both leads putting in great performances. The story is pretty engaging, though flawed, and the writing is decent. The actual construction of the story is what annoyed me the most, and I will explain specifically why, but in order to do so, we are going to have to get very spoiler heavy. So stop watching if you're going to see this movie.
Stop it! You're spoiling it! You're spoiling everything!
Alright, so Barbarian is full of twists and turns. The beginning of the movie survives on the strength of wondering whether Keith might be some kind of serial killer, having broken into the house to abduct or murder Tess. There is really good suspense here, and the movie is very well shot. We see the situation through Tess's perspective, and despite Keith's outward charm and kindness, there is always the lurking question of whether he might have malicious intentions. This is a fantastic way to start the movie, and I found myself absolutely loving it. If Zach had decided to keep this going for more of the movie, I think Barbarian would have ended up spectacular. One strange occurrence happens where Tess is woken up in the middle of the night by a strange noise, and her door is open, but Keith is still asleep. This was a great scene, creating mystery and leaving the audience in suspense. They should have kept this dynamic going further, with more strange occurrences building and building, with Tess being given some ammunition to suspect something is off with Keith. For example, she takes a picture of his ID, but as far as we can tell, she never Googles him, which is weird. She could have found some shady stuff like a past accusation or a family member dying under mysterious circumstances, something vague but unsettling to increase the tension being in the house with him. She could then confront him with this information only to have him sympathetically explain the context behind it, once again putting her at ease. You could continue this by having Keith bump into her after her interview, perhaps a coincidence but enough to make Tess once again unsettled. This is one way they could have improved the movie. What Zach does instead is have Tess investigate the basement, find a hidden door, and have that hidden door lead to an underground tunnel where it is clear people were being abducted, tortured, and raped. Keith goes down to investigate and stumbles upon a zombie woman who clearly has been down there for far too long. He gets killed, and then the camera cuts to a totally new character. Justin Long enters the movie at like the 55-minute mark, and we have to go through introducing his character and providing backstory and context, and providing him motivation to go to the house. Don't get me wrong, Justin Long acts just fine, but this felt exhausting in the theater, knowing exactly what was going to happen for the next like 15 to 20 minutes of the movie, but having it go through the motions anyway. Okay, we get it. He's going to go to the house under a different pretext and stumble upon Tess. As it turns out, the pretext is Justin was accused of raping a co-star in a TV pilot and has to sell his houses in Michigan to pay for the legal fees. His character is never, really supposed to be sympathetic, but what makes this decision especially baffling is Zach throws away an interesting, compelling, extremely likable character in Keith and has to bring in a brand new character and spend a shit ton of time in the middle of his movie to develop this character. This just kills the narrative momentum of the story, and like I said earlier, it is exhausting, tedious, and was a critical mistake that really hurts the movie overall. The movie functions just fine with Keith playing the same general role without having to bring the story to a screeching halt 75% of the way through. Using the changes I suggested earlier, you could even keep the zombie woman. In fact, I think the script works best with her in it. She is the explanation for the weird stuff happening to Tess, which she blames Keith for. Keith and Tess explore the basement together, find the zombie woman, and have to try and escape confinement together. This keeps the characters we actually give a shit about, and carries the momentum of the story forward instead of blowing it up for a Justin Long bomb. The other critical mistake the movie makes is cutting to a flashback after the time jump to Justin Long. The flashback explains how the previous owner of the house would kidnap and rape women and keep them in the basement, something which was pretty clear from the scenes earlier. This doesn't add anything to the story that anyone with half a brain hadn't already figured out, and once again destroys the forward progression of the narrative. These scenes could and should have been cut out, since explaining the backstory of a horror villain is almost always a mistake. It is scarier to not know, and we already had enough information to make a pretty good guess about what was happening. Overall, Barbarian is pretty good. The beginning is excellent, but Zach chose to introduce a main character way too late in the game. He shoots himself in the foot again by cutting to a flashback right in the middle of his falling action, the combination of which really hurts the movie overall. I think a few minor tweaks and this could have been a horror classic, but as it stands, it is simply a good movie. Not great, mind you. Definitely not a masterpiece, but good. I just wish we got more of Tess and Keith, who are easily the best part of the whole thing. Play to your strengths, Zach, and in this case, I think the strength of the film is the mix of tension and chemistry between Tess and Keith, though maybe that's just because of my terminal horror obsession.